Alright, so this is going to be part 2 to what if Asta had time magic. So with that being said, let's just roll the intro.
Bow in the presence of greatness. 'Cause right now that has forsaken us. You should be honored by my lateness. That I would even show up to this fake shit. So go ahead, go nuts, go.
So in the last part we had gotten from the first part all the way up to the attack on the capital, and with Fregolion losing his arm. Asta at this point has chronostasis around him to stop the bleeding, but this is also around the same time Rades is trying to escape, so Asta is trying to stop him at this point. Now because Asta was born with magic, he has magic sensing, and the problem with that is in canon, because he had no magic, he can focus on other senses, and that's why he could pick up on life energy easier than others, and that's why he had some sort of almost natural key sensing ability. But because he has magic, his senses are more spread out, and therefore can't really know key sensing or know what it is. Because he has no prior knowledge of it, he wouldn't have it, if that makes sense. Now because of that, he can't find Valtos, which is the one creating the portals, and because of this, Rades, I would say, actually does escape at this point. Also, moments prior, this is also around the time in where all the captains and the magic knights around the area would go and be teleported miles outside the city for a certain witch to come and steal magic from others. I believe this witch was Catherine, the one with ash magic. The fight between her and Yuno would basically be the same, as Yuno's senses would be removed essentially for a period of time, and because of this his mana sensing is increased, or at least he sees the flow of mana and therefore gets the stronger connection, and is the first step of unlocking his spirit. Now we cut back to Asta. He is furious. Not only was a person he looked up to, Fregolion, is near death's door because of these terrorists, but also he let them escape essentially. Although he tried to get them, he didn't know where the spatial mage was, and therefore he wasn't able to stop the portal. Now with them, getting out scot-free, no reinforcements would come, and therefore Asta would not get captured. Now that's not to say that the Midnight Sun don't have a eye out on Asta like they did in canon. They still do, as he has similar magic to the Wizard King. Now keep in mind that Patri at this time is still within the body of William, and therefore has knowledge of the Wizard King's magic, unlike other characters within the series. Many mages or magic knights do not know the magic of the Wizard King, so having that information prior to any fights is very important. After all this had gone down, this is where Asta would rush Fregolion to the castle to get treatment for his wounds. This is also around the same time where the other magic knights would come, and because there's no one really here to attack, they assist any of the injured that's around and help clean up the rubble and stop the fires, just how they did before. Now with this, Julius would still go towards the hideout or around the place where the magic stones are at, and actually capture 2 of the members, just how he did before. So Asta would say his goodbyes to, Fregolion, even though he can't hear him, and also Leo, as he's there by his brother's side. When he gets back to the Black Bull's hideout, he's really frustrated, to the point where Yami has to tell him to calm down, and he tells Yami how is he supposed to calm down when he just stood by when Fregolion went to fight the Midnight Sun and come back with one less arm. And he tells Asta, you were able to save that man. Without you, he may have bled to death, so be grateful for that. And Fregolion isn't someone that will just lie down and die like that. Eventually, he'll come back to us. And this is when Asta kind of storms off, as this affects him way more than it did in canon, as he feels personally responsible for what happened, unlike before. Over the next few days, Asta stays in his room and he goes over the scenario in his mind over and over to see if there's some way he could have helped. And by doing so, he starts to reimagine how it would be like if he were to actually help Fregolion and have him survive the encounter, at least unscathed. Now, because of this, he starts to unknowingly meditate in a sense, in the way that he's able to see the flow of mana. And because of the way that his magic works, this is pretty effective because he's going over the timeline, so to speak. And because of this, he's just replaying it over and over in his head, and he starts to get a better connection, and he's trying to understand how his magic would have worked in this scenario. And this is where he unlocks the first step into getting his spirit out. Now, it doesn't manifest right away, so it will take some time, but this is the first step, and it's a pretty crucial one. Now, for his spirit, I was looking through the different ones that you have in Black Clover already, that being the fire spirit, the wind spirit, and obviously the water spirit. And a common thing between them all is they first start off weak and then eventually get stronger, and some of them have some sort of level of intelligence while others don't. And I'm going to go with a more humanoid one, and that's going to be based off the primordial Greek god Kronos. Now, you might be confused and think this is the Titan Kronos. I believe that's how you pronounce it in Greek. Kronos. Now, Kronos is with a CH, while Kronos is with a K. That is the father to Zeus, and as well as Hades and Poseidon. Well, Kronos is the god of time within the Greek pantheon. Now, I did a lot of research, and throughout history, they have been confused for one another because of how similar the names are. So, I'll put on screen how you spell each of them. So, Kronos being the god of time, the primordial god of time, so before the Olympians, and Kronos being the father of the Olympians, or at least Zeus and his brothers. So yeah, as Asta's doing this sort of meditation, this is around the same time where Finral would have asked Asta to go on a mixer with him, as they're still in the same squad and he needs a third person. Now they go with the same group, that being Asta, Luck, and Finral, and they get paired up with the same people. So during this mixer, Asta accidentally lets out his magical pressure, and this is due to the fact that he's still thinking about the whole event with Fregolion, and he was still trying to access that state that he was in earlier that day, and that was with the mana flow. He then apologizes as he kind of shook the room, and because of this, the women there actually do take notice, because originally in canon, Asta had no magic, and these women that are here are mostly on this mixer to find a husband that can provide for them. That's why they have interest within this group in particular, because they're magic knights and they're very well paid. So Rebecca has a reason to actually, well, have an interest within Asta on the surface level, and this is how the interaction would go. So Asta would try to talk to her, and she would seem somewhat half interested, as she didn't really want to be there, but at the same time, if she does end up, with Asta, this could really help out her family quite a lot, as she's the only one taking care of her siblings. Now, this is where something strange actually starts to happen. Asta starts saying things, and he seems to mess up the mixer, but right when everything's about to fall apart, it seemingly goes back to zero, and he doesn't know what's happening. This continues on for a bit until someone at the back of his mind starts telling him to say certain things, and he does, and the conversation between him and Rebecca continues onwards. And she actually starts to get interested within Asta because they have something to connect with, and that is Asta being an orphan and being around so many siblings, and her being the older sister, while Asta was the older brother to the orphans. So this is what they're really connecting on, and Asta seems kind of confused, but he still goes along with it as he's starting to have a great time, but he doesn't understand why it kept replaying, as if his future sensing was going off, but he wasn't in danger, and he knows for a fact that it was happening in real time, but it was looping. After a bit, this is when they decide to, well, go home for the night. Later on, when Asta's in his room, he sets his grimoire down, and something strange starts to happen. It starts spinning in the air rapidly, and pages seem to fall out, only for those pages to form into some sort of humanoid shape that resembling an older man. Now, I'm not particular with the design for Kronos, but there's a lot of different ones. I'll just use the one from Smite, if you know what that game is. But yeah, I'll put up a picture just for the general concept of a god of time, if that makes sense. But you guys can tell me what it should look like, and maybe I'll draw it in the future. But yeah, this being starts to speak to Asta, and he tells him, wow, you're really bad at talking with women, but you're lucky I was there to help. And Asta's confused, and he asks the being who he is, and he tells Asta, you should be more grateful. You introduced me to a more powerful time mage, and I could have jumped ship and joined him, but he was already pretty powerful himself. And well, you're somewhat there. You have a lot of potential, but it'll come in time. Then Asta says, another time mage? I introduced you to him? Are you talking about the Wizard King? And then the being says, is that what he's called? Well, yes. Don't you remember what you said back then? And then Asta starts to remember that this is the spirit that he, well, showed Julius, at least the spell, because at this point he couldn't manifest. The being then continues, saying, by your face, I think you got it. Yes, I'm the time spirit. You could call me Kronos, the god of time. Kronos then continues on. I was able to manifest due to your want and desire to become stronger. As I see it, you're using your time magic very, well, straightforward. And by that, I mean literally. You're only going forward in time. Now that's fine here and there, but some things, well, are better backwards. For the majority of people, time will flow forward, and that's natural. But you, Asta, you and a select few others are special. You are born with an attribute unparalleled by anything else. Something that will never go away, and something that turns everything to dust. Time. And because of that, I will allow you to use some of my power. For example, back then at the capital, I saw that you were hopeless with Fregolion. You only delayed what was going to happen to him if he had no care. But with my power, things could have been different. I say that now, but I can't really manifest that much. Just continue practicing and become stronger. Eventually, you will be able to use me to the fullest extent. But that being said, this will be goodbye. For now, at least. This is when the papers that originally formed Kronos' body then went back into the grimoire. Asta is still shocked and even has some cold sweats. He just met something that said he was a god. Now this is a little bit different than other spirits, as though they are divine, only one has been, said to be a god, and I believe that was the water spirit. So jumping off from there, we can skip a few hours to days where Asta would be on his way to go meet Rebecca. Now, it wouldn't be totally the same, as he wouldn't ask Magna for help, but I do think he would bring it up to him just so he'd know where Asta would be at. Now, with that being said, Noelle would probably still go after Asta, as she'd be suspicious and somewhat jealous that he's going to a other girl's place. There at Rebecca's town, Asta would meet her and her siblings, as well as the church and their orphans there. This is where he would meet up with Marie, which is Gauche's sister, and the entire interaction between him and Gauche would still happen here. And this is where we could skip a few hours until it's night, and this is where the snow mage is basically controlling the children to go to these secret caves so they could steal their magic. So Ghosh ends up basically waking up everyone up in the process of killing Asta, or at least trying to. With this, they find out the children are gone and that they most likely were kidnapped, as the magic snow around them is giving off a spell that's only affecting children, as it's too weak for adults. So this is where Asta, Ghosh, and Mother Teresa go and try to find the children. Eventually they would find one of Rebecca's siblings, that being her younger brother, out in the snow, as he had the least amount of magic in the group of children and therefore was disposed of. This is where they break the spell and basically warm up while they go inside. Now Asta, just like in canon, would give him his robe to give him some confidence to stay outside as they go further down the tunnels. Once inside and they see the children, this is where Ghosh would go ahead and try to take out the snow mage, as he wants to get his sister back. Now the fight wouldn't be all too different, with Ghosh really overpowering the snow mage and the mud mage not really being that much of a threat, as Asta and Sister Teresa would help the children out because they're not really that big of a threat and are subdued pretty easily. With this being done, this is where Mother Teresa basically starts to heal all the children, breaking the spell and helping them regain their magic. After that, she uses a little bit more of her magic to create a transportation kind of flame animal, the leopard, as you see in the manga or anime, to get the children out. As this is going down, the mud mage actually activates a device on his table that lets the Midnight Sun know that he's in trouble. Because of this is when Sally comes in to kind of save him. So she fights against Ghosh and Asta. Now, she doesn't really know about Asta at this point, as she didn't need to back up Rades beforehand. So she has no real idea on Asta other than that he has time magic because of William knowing about it. Therefore, Parchi knows about it. Now, Ghosh versus Sally isn't going too well, as she's just able to bend the light coming off of his mirrors, so it's not really effective. Now with Asta, it actually is, as he's able to age it up, and it basically turns into dust as the gel dries and just crumbles away. Now, I forgot to mention this in other parts, but the way that Asta ages things up, it's not like to an extreme degree compared to something like maybe Julius, where he just turns you into dust. Yeah, that happens, but it's a bit slower. So let's say that Julius can age you up hundreds of years within a second. Well, Asta, maybe that's not really the case. Let's say that Asta can age someone up by decades using his time cutter, for example. Although it's not as fast as something like Julius, it's still quite a bit of time. 10 years within a second is really strong regardless. And when you combine that with Asta's physical strength, it's easy for him to cut through things, although the sword itself is dull. So let's get back into the story. So Sally is losing the fight, and it just so happens that the mud mage is there offering his service. But the condition is he wants her to, well, let him go. This actually does backfire on him though, as she does let him go, but she injects him with some experimental magic item. This makes it where his magic or mana overflows within him, creating all this mud around him, destroying his body in the process, but instead replacing it with some sort of mud creature. With this, Asta and Ghosh have to fight it. It's similar in ways of the sticky salamander, where it's not really a solid but can constantly regenerate itself, but to a higher extent, as the entire body is made of mana and isn't just a spell. So Ghosh tries to use his mirror magic on it, but it's not really effective, as when he pokes holes using his, well, mirror magic, it just seemingly endlessly regenerates. So Asta has a plan for this. he's going to try to combine 2 different spells that he has. First off, Kronos and a nameless beam spell that I had you guys come up with a name in the last part, and the only real comment that I got was Decay or Rapid Age. I forgot exactly the name of the second one, but we'll go with Decay. So Asta's planning to use both Kronos and Decay on him. Right when he's about to use Decay, something strange happens. An arm starts to form out of papers from his grimoire, and this arm is the arm of Kronos. He grabs onto Asta's arm and he tells him that that might not be the best move, as it'll waste too much magic, and Asta's already wasting all the magic holding down this, well, monster. So Kronos actually helps Asta by doing something interesting. Instead of aging the monster until it's, well, dead or just turns to dust, Kronos actually turns back time, specifically on this monster alone, and because he's within Chronostasis, he's outside the normal timeline, which he doesn't have to waste a lot of magic on. So instead of going years into the future, he only needs to go 1 hour in the past, and this is where he does so. After that, the Mud Mage turns back into his human form, not knowing anything that happened, and he gets knocked out by Asta. With that, Sally is on the ropes and wants to retreat. Sally presses a button on a device similar to what the Mud Mage had earlier, and this tells the Midnight Sun that she's in trouble and that she needs help. With this, Licht actually appears, or Partry, but I'll use Licht for now. So Licht actually comes through and saves Sally. Sally's able to get back to the hideout, and Licht stays in her place with Valtos being there for transportation. But his appearance comes at a surprise to the rest of the group. Asta, with his future vision, does see them getting attacked, but as he tries to defend them, the attacks were just too fast for him, and therefore Teresa and Ghosh are, well, injured pretty badly, but not to the same extent as before. Ghosh can actually still move, while Teresa can't. Asta tells Ghosh to take Teresa back to the town so that she doesn't die, and at this point all the children are gone, so they don't need to worry about that. He tells them that he's fast enough to, well, counteract this mage, and that he's way too powerful for them. Ghosh tells Asta, "Are you crazy? You could tell how much magic is coming off of him. This man's insane. I've never met anything like it. Mana's just pouring out of him." He tells Ghosh not to worry. If anything bad happens to him, he'll just use his time magic to reverse it. Asta, knowing that he really can't do that, bluffs his way out of this, and Ghosh leaves with Mother Teresa. Asta notices how much magic is coming off of this guy, and he's thinking like, how am I gonna beat him? There's really only one shot. I don't know if I can even like hit him, but I need to capture him somehow. Now the reason why Asta's saying this is because he doesn't think he'd be able to kill him, as this man who just shot at them, his magic was so fast that Asta could barely react to it. Because remember, light magic is one of the fastest magics out there, and even Julius had some trouble trying to capture Partry. So Licht looks at Asta and tells him, "Do you really think a lowly human like you can defeat someone like me? I will admit you are fast when it comes to reacting, but I doubt you'll be able to keep up with me. It's interesting that you seem to have the same magic as him." Now Asta, trying to stall some time, tries to talk with Licht and asks him, "What do you mean him? The Wizard King?" And obviously Licht says yes, that man. And he continues, well, at least Asta does, questioning him. He tells Partry, "Why are you doing this? Why kidnap kids? They're innocent. They haven't done anything to you." And this is where Partry says, "None of them are innocent. They're born sinful. After what your people have done, it's unforgivable." So the two start fighting, and Asta is on the defensive. He really can't fight against Partry all too well, as he's just way too fast for him, and he's relying on his future vision and, well, Kronos a little bit. But at this point, Kronos can't really manifest all too well either. This is when Patri shoots out some swords made out of light, and Asta actually does use chronostasis and shoots him back at him. This actually does land a hit on him, but the worst comes to the worst, and he sees that Patri is healing himself. Now Asta is really in trouble, knowing that even if he does land a hit on him, he can heal himself, and the stuff that he has is pretty much deadly no matter what he does, so he has to capture him. Patri would get enraged by this, as this is a rather large blow to him, because remember, in canon, he didn't really get hurt all too much in the fight itself, not really scoring too much blood or even anything like that. So to be stabbed like this is a real juxtaposition to what it was before, and I think this would get him enraged to the point where he would start using his light whip. Now this is where he starts, using it all over the place. It like squirming all over the walls of the cave would start to collapse it. Asta, to no surprise from Patri, would survive this. As the two continue fighting, they're not really making any progress. Both of them are extremely fast and have ways to prevent damage to themselves. So it's just a matter of who can, outlast the other when it comes to magic. And when it comes to magical reserves, Patri has Asta beat there. Eventually, this is when backup does arrive. Yami from the Black Bulls, as well as Finral. Now, with Yami being there, Asta can rest somewhat, but he does help out Yami quite a bit here, and you'll see later on. Yami comes up to Asta and says, "What's wrong, rookie? Running out of steam?" And he tells Yami that he could still fight. Now Yami says, "Just stand there and watch a captain work." And this is when Kronos actually tells Asta something. He says to get near and touch Yami for something interesting to happen. Now he does so, and Yami freaks out a bit. He says, "Kid, what are you doing?" And this is where Kronos actually gives a bit of his magic towards Yami and actually reinforces his body, giving him some sort of reinforcement magic. Now it isn't like a whole transformation, at least not just yet, but right now he's reinforcing Yami's body just like normal reinforcement magic, but he's making him a lot faster when it comes to it instead of just purely strength. Now Yami at this point is amped up quite a significant amount, as right now after the amp he starts to fight Patri, and the difference between speed that he had previously is a lot shortened, as before Yami was really focusing on his physical strength to keep up with the light magic, as his dark magic was completely and utterly slow. But with this helping out, it's increased so much more, and now it's actually pushing Patri back quite a bit. Now it's to the point to where Patri has to use some of his more extreme spells, the main one being Divine Punishment. Now Yami sees him charging up this attack, and with his reinforcement magic still on him, he goes for the kill. Except Patri does react, but not as fast as he thought. This actually ends up with Patri getting stabbed in the abdomen. Yami takes his blade out of his chest, and Patri hits the ground, and he starts to use a spell, Healing Light Particles. But Yami stops it halfway through using his binding magic, and this is where Patri's still very much hurt. Now, he's not bleeding out thanks to his recovery magic, but he's still in a fragile state. So, after that's done, the group waits for the mana to recharge a bit so Finral can take him to the capital, and this is when the third eye comes. Seeing how badly Patri was injured really does anger them, to the point where two of them will take Patri while the other one stays to kill them, essentially. So Raya and Fauna go and take Patri away after they take Patri away from Yami, and Vetto stays behind, ready to kill them. He doesn't really care about the despair, and they don't really care about introductions either. At this point they think Patri might die, so they're really alert. Vetto goes directly into his third eye state, opening his third eye and becoming way more powerful than normal. He's using legendary beast magic. Now he goes directly to fight against Yami, and at this point the reinforcement magic would have worn off by then, so Yami doesn't have that power up anymore. The fight between Vetto and Yami is very one-sided at this point, as this isn't the same Yami that fights, I guess, Vetto at the end of the Seawater Temple, because obviously that is a stronger Yami with a new spell. Now Vetto is dominating Yami. He's punching so fast and with so much power that Yami can't really keep up with the blocks. And not only that, but his sword actually ends up breaking here because of how much force Vetto's putting in. Now remember, he is extremely enraged, almost to the point of self-destruction, but we're not just there yet. You combine this with the fact that Vetto knows Ki, and Yami doesn't really have an upper hand here. When Yami gets enough room between the two, he tells Asta he's not going to be able to bring this man back to the capital alive. We're going to have to kill him here. So Asta obliges. He asks Yami if he could injure him in some way to slow him down as he prepares to one-shot, well, Vetto. Yami, with his half-broken sword, says he will, and with the last bit of magical power that he has, goes and rushes towards Vetto. Yami keeps fighting and eventually he runs out of magic but not stamina, and now he has to defend himself with just a blade. But he does manage to wound Vetto on his chest quite a bit, and he starts to slow down, but not too significantly. With this, it gives enough time for Asta to shoot him with a Ray of Decay, one of his spells that I mentioned earlier. Asta's able to shoot him in the chest, and this rapidly ages him to the point where his entire chest is that of an old man, and this continues to spread throughout his body until he's sickly gray. Asta continues, and eventually Vetto is dust within mere moments. Now it's not exactly like the Wizard King where he instantly destroys someone, but it is quick nonetheless. Yami himself is badly injured too, with a couple stab wounds towards the side of his abdomen due to Vetto constantly hitting him. The other captains come by eventually, and they see the state within Yami. At this point, they're not joking, and they aren't, well, I guess, have that much banter like they used to within canon. They know this is serious, and someone had to be really strong to fight someone like Yami, even if he is one of the lower ranking captains. Charlotte takes Yami with her to the capital using Finral's magic, and the others stay there to get the story from Asta and the rest of the townfolk. After this, they make sure that everyone is safe within the town, and they go back to the capital. So Vetto is dead at this point, a lot sooner than he was in the anime, and this is a major plot point as this makes Sally work on the cloning machine, or the bodies for, well, the souls, or whatever you want to call it, faster. As before, she had no real pressure to continue it at a faster pace, but now with Vetto being dead, it's a major blow to the organization. Not only that, but they even have a greater hatred for humans, because not only did they injure Licht significantly, but they also killed Vetto really early. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoy this video. I try to make it a bit longer than usual. I know I haven't posted in quite a bit, but I try to drop videos when I can. And with that being said, we gotta shout out the patrons over on Patreon. So if you want to join them, it'll be linked in the description, or you could go and check out patreon.com/ComicSansTheMan, and there you have a chance to get a drawing from me as I pick a random person from each tier. So you have 3 different options, and the higher tiers obviously have a higher chance of you getting a drawing from me, and you're not restricted to the 1:1 ratio that I use for the lower tier drawings. So with that being said, also follow my Twitter as I post exclusive art there So if you're interested in my art, you could look at it there. So let's get on with the patrons over on Patreon. In our gold tier, we have Nippy Director, Kenny, Dwayne Fenn, and Lyco. So if you want to join them, it only takes $1 and you get my videos early. So with that being said, this is going to be the video. So yeah.